Namaskar. Hello and welcome to 𝗣𝗚𝗃𝗁 channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. After a long hiatus, I have with me Pandit Satish Sharma from across the pond. And guess what? United Kingdom is announcing that they are going to polls on the 4th of July. What a day. What a day. Amazing. Let's first welcome our guest of the day, Pandit Satish Sharma. Pandit ji, Ram Ram, Namaskar, Radhe Radhe, how are you?
Jai Shri Ramji. Sriji, what a long time we have had. It's been far too long. It's a pleasure to be here. But as I think you know, I've been doing an awful lot of traveling recently. Have spent a lot of time in Bharat, where we're doing some really good work on Hindu phobia and anti-Hinduism, and recently in the US as well. So that's been keeping me busy. But this is a great time to have a conversation. Thank you for reaching out to me as soon as you got the news of the 4th of July. British election. It's a natural conversation for the American Hindu to be speaking to the British Hindu.
Yes, indeed. And viewers, whatever we are going to discuss here today applies not just to the Hindus of United Kingdom, but also the Hindus of United States. You know, you need to really start considering weighing your vote, because it is now becoming apparent that many illegals are going to be getting voting rights in the United States. They've just been here for a few weeks and they are going to get voting rights. And I'm sure something similar exists in the United Kingdom also. So by not going, there's a good chance that you are going to lose out. And who you should vote for, those things you can decide based on how this conversation goes. We're going to have it once every week with Panditji. And we're going to be talking about important issues, things that cut to the chase. What are the things that are affecting us as a community, and how do we make sure that our voice is heard? I mean, taking pictures with a candidate is not going to be enough anymore. And there is something more. It has to be a quid pro quo. Both sides gain from this. So we'll start looking at that as how we can benefit, how we can make sure that the indigenous population also benefits, because we have always assimilated into the community that we put down our roots. So Panditji, first off, what made Rishi Sunak to make this announcement now? Is there a best time for this, or is it going to be a bad time for conservatives? Because the story that I'm hearing is they have a 20-point deficit with the Labour Party. That's a big deficit to overcome. I mean, it's like wanting to score 40 runs in the last 2 hours in a T20 game. Very, very difficult. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sriji. Firstly, I don't think there has ever been such a chaotic background to an election as there is at this moment in time. The electoral system is in chaos. Parliament is making all of the noises that it always has done, but there is no clear leadership, there's no clear guidance, and there's no clear mandate. In fact, it's quite funny. The 4th of July is incredibly symbolic, isn't it?
Yes.
And I wonder whether the irony has been noticed yet. The 4th of July was the date when I think 13 British colonies said, we don't believe in the British Parliament. And they introduced their own constitution, thereby rejecting the validity and the legality of the British Parliament. That was the end of the British occupation and colonial occupation of the Americas. That was the 4th of July. And if the truth be told, in the United Kingdom, I think the British public, the British citizens, are equally fed up of the British Parliament and parliamentarians as well. If they had an opportunity, I'm sure that they would find, perhaps towards the Isle of Wight, they'd find a bay and dump a whole load of taxable tea or something like that as a symbolic gesture. This is the deeper issue that we face. In this country, the parliamentarians have completely lost the respect of the public. So whether it's a 20% vote, a 20% vote lead, a 20%, shall we say, estimate at this moment in time, that's negligible. It's not going to make much of a difference. The pollsters have been proven time and time again at this stage of the game to be so disconnected from the ground reality that their predictions are pretty much worthless. So I think as time progresses, we'll see that this 20% is actually just a meaningless figure. Very optimistic as well as very pessimistic, depending upon which camp you're speaking from. So as I've said, the starting point should be that it's not a question of whether the Conservatives have got the trust of the British people, or the Labour Party, or the Greens, or the Liberal Democrats. What's actually in the balance is whether Parliament has actually got any mandate, a public mandate to, yes, govern the people of this country. And I think as the days tick by and as the time moves forward towards the election, that's going to become clear. This is going to lead us into a strange situation. Personally, I think we are going to see the appearance of a number of parties, a number of groups will suddenly step forward, and we will move, I feel, towards a growth and an evolution in the British political scene. It's been a two-party horse race for such a long period of time, and they come up with all sorts of justification for it. But frankly speaking, a two-party horse race in which both horses are pretty much wearing the same colors is not a democratic process. And I think this time we're going to see more horses in the race. And as the time progresses, we may even see splits appearing within the Labour Party and indeed within the Conservative Party. So the trumpet has been sounded. I keep thinking of horses and hounds. You know, the race is about to commence, and let's see how the race progresses. We are going to see so much turmoil.
Panditji, let's go back and look at the last 5 years of the Conservative rule. They've been in power for 14 years, so there is going to be some anti-incumbency feeling for sure. But summarize for us what you think are the accomplishments of the Conservative Party in the last 5 years.
It's a wonderful question. Let's have a look at the good points first. We've just had announcements that the economy is in better shape than was anticipated. Inflation has fallen beneath expectations. Interest rates look as though they're going to be going down. And all of that's wonderful. And if you have a spreadsheet and you want to run a nation by a spreadsheet, then those are actually really good things. But I'm reminded of two things. I'm reminded of one, a conversation that your fellow countryman Henry Ford had in very difficult times, when his advisor said to him, look, we can save a lot of money by shutting down many of the plants that we have to manufacture cars. And he looked at them and he said, well, the reason we exist is to manufacture cars. If I wanted to just make money, I could shut down all of those plants and put all of those employees out of employment. So the spreadsheet approach is not necessarily sufficient. So just putting that to one side and bearing in mind that Rishi Sunak has a background in finance, has a background in the city. I have a sentiment, and I think the sentiment is shared along the country, that it's not enough to just have the facts and figures on the economic balance sheet beginning to look rosy. The other image I have in my mind is of an emaciated, poverty-stricken, very poor person wearing tattered clothes, perhaps even homeless, holding up a placard saying, I'm really happy that inflation is down by 2%. You know, it's like the image that we see so often these days of the Bengal famine. Those emaciated people were not particularly happy that Tommies in Europe were receiving food grain, which really was supposed to be for their benefit. So I think the reality on the ground with the food banks, with the decline in the health of the population, the unbelievably long queues for medical treatments, all of those factors are going to dominate. And so those two, when they're weighed up, I think that Rishi will lose out. If he had been able to connect with the population more, the Conservatives had been able to connect with their citizenry more, they would be in a different situation. But 14 years of Conservative rule, especially the last 5, has seen, I think, the traditional image of the Conservative Party as the party of law and order completely disappear. It's really not become identified with those two. I'm sure you have seen it. I think we spoke about it once, the level of violence on the streets in London. Yes. The recent reports where prominent cricketers and indeed Indian celebrities were saying, well, we can't walk down the streets of London without taking our watches off because we get mugged and they get stolen. And that's under the custody of the party of law and order. No, the Conservatives have a long, long way to catch up.
Panditji, let's take a look at one of the biggest problems that United Kingdom is facing, and that is of illegal immigration. People just jumping on a boat and crossing the straits and landing on the shores of United Kingdom. Now, there was a much taunted or much wanted 𝗣𝗚𝘂𝘆, I'm not pronouncing it right, I know, vaunted claim that the processing for the illegals is going to be now moved to or shifted to Rwanda, and that the first set of people, deportees, are going to start anytime now. This was promised in 2022 when 𝗤𝗖𝗄𝗍𝗄 was the Secretary of Home, and now I think finally Rishi Sunak seems to think that they will be able to overcome all the legal hurdles and get this thing done. But today, has the illegal immigration pace at which it was happening, has it slowed down, or it is still at the same high number?
It's at the same high number. And in fact, I think this is possibly one of the factors which has prompted Rishi to call the election at this moment in time. As we move from spring into summer and the weather improves, we are going to see, I think, a huge influx of more boats arriving across the channel. I think that's going to increase dramatically. There is a fundamental issue here as well. The whole point behind Brexit was to be able to control borders and to be able to control laws. And in fact, the Conservatives, Boris Johnson onwards, were adamant that they were going to deliver the will of the people. But evidently and demonstrably, there is no control over the borders. Otherwise, increasing numbers of illegal arrivals would not be increasing beyond any. I think some 700,000 was a figure that was mentioned not so long ago. And the other thing was about laws. Now, the laws issue is a big and a very important issue. A part of Brexit was that we would not be under the jurisdiction of the European Court. And unless you move outside of the European Court of Justice, you have no control over your laws. We haven't been able to do that. And in fact, a number of Home Secretaries have all fallen casualty to this one issue, that they were unable to enforce laws that their government wanted to impose because the European Court of Justice, which the British justice system is subservient to, overrules it. It's that classic line from that extraordinarily powerful film, The Kashmir Files, "Sarkar to inki hai, lekin system to hamara hai." And I think this has been the symptom of what has happened here. Although there are governments in place, they are not in power. And I don't see that changing. And so Rishi has not been able to deliver on those two fundamental aspects, borders and laws. And if the Conservatives, the party of law and order, is not able to deliver it, then it's not really a Conservative party anymore. And this is something that has really rankled with the rank and file of the centre and the centre-rights.
Panditji, do you think the Labour might put in its manifesto the opposite of Brexit, Brentry?
Who knows? The Labour Party has a fundamental structural systemic problem. And that is that rather than using head and heart in equal balances, it uses heart almost exclusively and then uses head to try and scramble out of the problems that using heart always lets you entertain. It's become a church for anybody who would appeal to them on the basis of victimhood, whether justified or unjustified. And the difficulty with being a church for anybody who is able to put forward a claim for victimhood, how do you on earth put together any sort of manifesto at all? You're talking about 1 point on a manifesto. If the manifesto has to be approved by special interest groups, then they are going to insist on their manifesto. And I think this is where the Labour Party is going to really struggle, because the Labour Party, and we have seen it, haven't we, on the streets, they have activists, very large numbers, who are acting not in the interests of the British people, but apparently for the Palestinians. The whole of the centre left and indeed the far left has been hijacked, in some cases unwillingly, by this conversation of what's going on in Gaza. And this is actually a wonderful example. There is no policy, there is no law that could be passed in this country which would directly impact upon the problems of the Middle East. They might think that there is. There maybe was a time when that was the case, but that is no longer the time. And that will leave Britain with the simple choice. Either it interferes in the democratically elected functioning of a government in Israel, which has a democratic mandate, whether you agree with it or not, or you find its policies acceptable or not. It is a democratically elected sovereign state. And so if Britain can't impose a law or influence law, the only option it has is to interfere in their sovereign affairs. Do Labour have the wherewithal to do that? I don't see it. But this is really, I think this is the heart of the problem for the Labour Party. They have an electorate who pays taxes into the exchequer. And they pay taxes for the parties in power, in government, to look after and place as primary the interests and well-being of the citizens and taxpayers of this country. There is absolutely no mandate from the citizenry which says to any of the parties, yes, please delegate authority and resources, apply resources to resolve these problems in the Middle East. That is not a mandate that has been given. In some of the local councils, we saw that that was a mandate that was given, and it was extraordinary. It's never happened before. This is part of why I say there is so much chaos at this moment in time. All the old assumptions that were in place, they don't seem to apply anymore. You know, it's a fundamental assumption of an average voter that I'm paying my taxes into the coffers of government. Government's going to use those for two things. One is to protect me from criminals, and two is to protect the nation from invasion. What else can a government do? Economic activity is actually at the hands of the population. It's not, a government cannot inspire or force a citizenry to become a workforce. That's not how democracy works. So what can it do other than provide basic services, protection? There's very little it can do. And yet, all of a sudden, the government seems to have forgotten that. This is also, I think, part of the malady within Parliament. They have spent so long virtue signaling to the whole world, pointing out everything that's wrong in India, holding their meetings about freedom, this fictitious freedom of religion and belief being under threat, of democracy being under threat, of freedom of press being under threat. They spent more time on those issues than actually looking after the citizenry of the United Kingdom. And this is one of the reasons I think the United Kingdom citizens are really going to put all of their parliamentarians through the mill this time. There will be accountability and scrutiny on a scale never before witnessed. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yes, indeed. And viewers, we have some unasked for advice, if you will. But I can tell you, first of all, that this has actually paid dividends in the United States. If you notice now, you're seeing all the 6 Indian origin congressmen, women, essentially signing up for some of the things that are very, very important for Hindus. For example, you saw the recent one, which Sree Iyer wrote, and all the other Indian origin congressmen and women signed. First for Pramila Jayapal, I might say, and I salute to her, that she felt that this was important and this had to be supported. Now that's gaining more momentum. There's going to be more things that's happening. But viewers, this did not come just from Indian Americans going and meeting with Indian origin congressmen and women, having their picture taken with them and then putting it in their drawing room. That's not at all enough. If you're going to donate to somebody, then you also tell them nicely, politely, that these are the things. Just give them 3 things that are probably important for that constituency, and make sure that you don't give all of your donations in one shot. There is a limit. For example, in US, only 3,300 per individual can donate to a politician. So you can say, okay, I'll give 1,000 now. And the reason you need to do that is because it's a quid pro quo. They need to deliver something also. Make sure that that donation of yours, stretches and goes far. And this is very, very important. And I don't know how things are in Panditji in United Kingdom, but this is how things are in the United States. I've been telling this thing ceaselessly, back and again, relentlessly telling people, look, you need to get something back in return for what you are giving as donations. There's $20,000 a plate dinners. Like Biden was here recently. Of course, I didn't go. But what exactly did those people who were donating thousands of dollars what are they getting in return? Will anyone tell us what they have asked for? Because then we can say whether the Democrats delivered or not. So this is one thing that we would like to see change in the United Kingdom also. Talk to us a little bit about how things are in UK, sir.
Sree, this is probably the most important part of what we're talking about today. Right? There are some very simple fundamentals that I think Hindus generally don't pay enough attention to. We have in our Upanishads asatoma satgamaya, right? That we have to look at the tattva, at the satya of any situation. What's the reality of what the situation is? And here are some things that I think I'm going to share, which for me are realities, and I hope they'll help clear the opinion of some of our perhaps more confused or uninformed potential voters. One of them is this: if you are proud of what is happening in Bharat, if you are proud of the fact that it's moving up the league tables in terms of global GDP, if you're proud of the fact that it's hosting the G20, if you're proud of the fact that infrastructure is expanding at a phenomenal rate, there is one group of people who are completely and totally responsible for these changes. And it's not the BJP. It's the people who voted the BJP into power. Each and every single person who voted this government into power is actually the person who's responsible for making India into what it is today. Those who didn't vote at all are, I think, the worst culprits. Those who voted for the opposition, well done. At least they participated in this democratic competition. And just turning to those who didn't vote at all, I think we have to remind them that ultimately politics comes down to two things. One is there is a huge bank account, and everybody by law pays into that bank account. That's what our taxation is. You can't choose not to pay taxes, right? You have to pay taxes by law. So there's all this money going into this bank account. You're working hard to put your hard-earned money into that tax bank account. Are you not in the slightest bit interested as to how that money is going to be spent? It's very probable that if you don't pay any interest to it at all, then people may take control over that bank account and use it to deny you of your freedoms and of your rights, and indeed of the income and the well-being that you are enjoying. Taxation is something that the government in power can levy. They can increase it. They can decide how much money they're taking from you. And so it really does make sense to pay attention to what happens to that money that is going into the coffers. And for Hindus, I'm going to remind them of a particularly painful episode in our history. When we were colonized by the British, taxation went through the roof. There are so many accounts of people, farmers, being driven into poverty because the taxation authorities were in Britain and they weren't interested in the well-being of the farmers. They were taxed literally to extinction, destitution. And so it's worth paying a little bit of interest as to what happens with the money that you're putting into this huge bank account and who has the key to it. The other thing, people take this opportunity to vote so lightly. Democracy is the only system where an individual has a voice in determining their own future. In theocracy, which is ruled by an invisible God somewhere in the clouds or what have you, there is absolutely no freedom to have a voice in what the future is. In a dictatorship, in a monarchy, there is no choice. So democracy is this tiny little system whereby each of us can have a choice in what our own future is. And the one weakness within a democracy is that people who believe in monarchies and theocracies, they can use democratic process to finish democratic process. In the last couple of centuries, we have seen so many nations taken over because people used force and violence to make regimes, to have regime change, military coups, invasions, conquest by the sword. All of these are ways in which people take hold of that one bank account. The remarkable thing that we are seeing is now that people are saying, well, we don't need to do all of that. All we need to do is vote strategically, and then we can take over the government, and then we can end democracy once and for all. This is what we are potentially leading to if people say, we don't really believe in voting, we're not going to vote. You know, there is a peculiar type of a Hindu, a dear friend of mine, I shan't name him, but when he watches this, he'll know who I'm referring to. He pulls his hair out when we talk about the fact that Hindus not voting in enough numbers. And he summarized it. He calls this type of a Hindu who doesn't want to vote a Buddhu Hindu. And this is a phrase that he's coined. And he sends me messages from time to time saying, look, another Buddhu Hindu, look what he's tweeted. But it reminded me of a German philosopher called Bertolt Brecht, who wrote something about the worst of all illiterates. He said that the political illiterate is the worst of all illiterates. This political illiterate is so stupid that he is proud and swells his chest, saying that he hates politics. This imbecile doesn't know that from his political ignorance is born the prostitute, the abandoned child, and the worst thieves of all, the bad politicians, corrupted and the flunkies of national and multinational companies. Now, you couldn't really spell it out more than that. The last thing I'd just say is that those who are politically corrupt, they love people who don't vote. They love to encourage people not to engage in the democratic process, especially when they're in power, because it secures their power. So if for any reason you're thinking that none of the above, nota, or not even voting is a clever idea, think again. If enough people choose that option, you lose the option of even having that option. So this is vitally important. Every single Hindu must vote. You asked about the United Kingdom a few elections ago. I think only 15% of our British Hindu community voted. In the last election, I think it was 24%. And these are unbelievably foolish figures. For people who feel they are the children of the Vishwaguru, not to have even realized that not voting leads to the loss of freedoms, I think it's a disappointing situation. And I would really appeal to every single member of the British Hindu community, the American Hindu community, and the Indian indigenous community. Step forward and vote. Your vote does matter. The Indic vote matters.
Yes, indeed. And viewers, we are going to make this thing a weekly affair, and Panditji will come up and we'll be talking about the events and who said what, also the trends and what's really getting important as far as people are concerned. So do tune in, and we would like to hear from you by way of comments. If there's any particular thing that you would like us to address, because by reading the comments, Panditji and I will know, okay, we're going to touch upon this particular topic in our next episode. This will be going on till July 4th. And we really, really would like your participation by way of comments. And also, please share this thing on your WhatsApp groups. Also, if you are watching it on Facebook, do share it on Facebook also. And Panditji, it's such a joy and pleasure. It was such a big deal for us 5 years ago when we made sure that the Conservatives came back. And well, this time, I don't know what we are going to do, whether we are going to get behind Conservatives and say that one more term is needed, or we are going to see, well, maybe the Labour has a better narrative. I don't know. I'm leaving it open. We'll see how things go. And thank you so much for taking time out. It's really late in the evening for you. But viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and also follow Panditji at the British Hindu, just like the way it is there in his name, at the 𝗤𝗚𝗖𝙩𝙤𝙤. Thank you so much, Panditji. Namaskar.
Shriji, Jai Shri Ram, Namaskar, and I look forward to our future conversations where we'll dig in a little bit deeper. Let's see what's happening in Leicester. Let's see what's happening in Birmingham. Let's see what the individual politicians are saying. And let's also see what our community leaders, what's happening in our temples. Are they still garlanding politicians, or have they learned what Barack Obama, I think your former president, was so keen to teach? He said Hindus are the only people who will want a photograph and want nothing in return. They'll give you huge donations, and then all they want is a photograph. And this is the most, I think, illiterate of means of engaging with politicians. Let's see if we can help our community and our own diaspora communities to really start to play their role and fulfill the potential politically as well as we have in economic terms. Sreeji, thank you so much for putting this together at such short notice. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir. Namaskar.
Jai Shri Ram. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.